It was a late autumn evening, and the sun had already slipped below the tree line when I first heard about the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. People always whispered about strange things out there, but I never paid much attention. The place was nearly forgotten, buried under years of dust, rot, and silence. But when I finally set foot near that property, I understood why the locals refused to even drive down that road after dark. The farmhouse stood alone, surrounded by acres of overgrown weeds and skeletal trees that looked like they were reaching toward the sky in agony. The gravel path leading up to it was cracked and uneven, as if no one had bothered to maintain it for decades. The windows, black and hollow, seemed to follow me as I got closer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting inside. I had gone there with a small group of friends, though I can't remember why we thought it was a good idea. Maybe it was just the thrill, the kind of reckless curiosity people feel when they're young and believe nothing can hurt them. At first, everything was quiet, almost too quiet. The air was still unnaturally heavy, and even the usual sound of crickets had vanished. It was the silence that put us all on edge, but none of us admitted it out loud as we approached the front porch. One of the boards snapped under my weight, echoing like a gunshot across the fields. My heart jumped into my throat, but the others laughed nervously, brushing it off. The door was slightly ajar, swinging back and forth with a faint creak, though there was no wind. I remember pausing there, staring at that darkened doorway, feeling the pressure of the night closing in around me. The moment I stepped inside, a smell hit me: damp wood, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the odor of decay. It was metallic, sharp, like the smell of blood left too long in the air. Dust floated in the glow of our flashlights, swirling slowly as though disturbed by something unseen. The floor groaned under our steps, and every sound seemed amplified in the emptiness of that house. We wandered through the rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The wallpaper was peeling, stained with dark patches that looked too much like old handprints. A staircase loomed at the end of the hallway, its steps disappearing into shadow. Nobody wanted to go up, so we stayed on the first floor, sticking close together. That's when we noticed the photographs. On the walls, hung, crooked and faded, were family portraits. They were old, black and white, and the faces in them had a strange clarity, like their eyes had been painted on after the photographs were taken. They seemed to stare directly at us, no matter where we stood. One of my friends joked that the family must still be here, watching us, but his voice cracked halfway through, and none of us laughed in the kitchen. There was a table set with plates, forks, and knives. The silverware was tarnished, and the plates were covered in a thick layer of dust. But it looked as though someone had once been sitting there waiting for dinner that never came. There was even a candle burned halfway down, with wax frozen in long, hardened drips. That detail, more than anything, unsettled MIT, felt like we had interrupted something, like the house had been holding its breath all this time, waiting for us to arrive. Then came the sound. At first, it was faint, like something scratching against the wood, far away. We froze, straining to hear, and it grew louder, sharper, until it was clear it was coming from inside the walls. It moved slowly, traveling from one end of the room to the other, and then stopped abruptly. None of us spoke. The silence afterward was worse than the scratching itself, as though the house knew we were listening. We should have left then. Every instinct told me to turn around, to get out before something happened. But we didn't. Curiosity, pride, and a little bit of fear kept us rooted to the spot. My friend pushed open a door at the far end of the kitchen, and we found a narrow stairway leading down into the basement. The air that drifted up was colder than anything I'd ever felt, sharp enough to sting my skin, and it smelled of damp stone and rust. Against my better judgment, we went down. The wooden steps groaned so loudly under us that I thought they might give way, plunging us into the darkness below. Our flashlights barely cut through the black, and the beam shook in my hand as we reached the bottom. The basement was enormous, larger than it had any right to be, as though the house sat on top of a cavern instead of solid earth. The walls were rough stone, wet and dripping, and the floor was uneven. In the center stood something that made my chest a tina circle carved into the stone floor, filled with symbols I didn't recognize. Some looked ancient, others newer, scratched over the old ones as though someone had tried to change or cover them. The circle seemed wrong, like it had weight, pulling at the air around it. My friend stepped closer, pointing at the symbols, said it was probably some old farmer's ritual, maybe even just nonsense. But the moment he crossed into that circle, the air shifted. I don't know how else to explain it. The pressure in the room changed, and my ears popped as if we'd dropped underwater. Then the scratching sound returned, this time from directly beneath our feet. The floor vibrated lightly, just enough that we could feel it through our shoes. My friend stumbled back, and we all clustered together, staring at that circle as though it might open up and swallow us whole. And then we heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, rising from below the stones, speaking words I couldn't understand. The sound was layered, like more than one person was speaking at the same time, their voices overlapping in a way that made my skin crawl. The words echoed off the walls, twisting in the air, and no matter how hard I tried, couldn't block them out. One of my friends screamed, dropping his flashlight, and in that moment, the circle flared. A faint red glow seeped from the carvings, pulsing like a heartbeat. The entire basement felt alive, the walls trembling as if the house itself was breathing. The glow spread, and for a second, I saw shaped shadows moving along the edges of the light, long and distorted, like something crawling just beyond the veil of what we could see. We ran. There was no discussion, no hesitation. We bolted up the stairs, tripping over each other in our panic. The air felt thicker, pressing against us, slowing us down, as though the house didn't want us to leave. When we reached the first floor, the portraits on the walls had changed. Their faces were no longer calm or expressionless. Their mouths were open, twisted into silent screams. Their eyes, darker than before, empty pits that seemed to follow us as we fled through the front door. The moment we burst outside, the air was different, lighter, warmer, and filled with the sound of crickets again. We didn't stop running until the house was a distant silhouette behind us, swallowed by the night. But as we stood there, catching our breath, one of my friends pointed back at the house. Through the upstairs window, a dim red glow flickered once, then faded into darkness. And even now, years later, I could still hear that voice sometimes, in the quietest moments, whispering words I don't understand but will never forget. The night air had a weight to it that seemed almost unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. After the events at the old farmhouse, none of us could sleep properly. But the thought of going back, or even talking about what we'd seen, was unbearable. Yet here we were, drawn by the same curiosity, the same reckless impulse that had brought us into that house the first time. We drove along the cracked asphalt road leading to the old woods beyond town, the headlights cutting weak paths through the fog that was settling over the fields. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting and crawling at the edges of our vision. Even the trees, gnarled and leafless, seemed to lean toward the car, reaching with skeletal fingers that scraped the metal roof with an eerie insistence. None of us spoke at first. There was an unspoken agreement that silence was safer than words, that speaking might draw attention from whatever was watching us. The fog thickened, clinging to the windshield, and I noticed the air had gone colder still. My breath came out in small clouds inside the car, and the radio, which had been playing static, suddenly emitted a low, unsteady hum before going completely dead. We parked near the edge of the woods, where the path narrowed and the trees crowded together like conspirators. The forest floor was thick with leaves, damp and slick, making every step a careful negotiation. The further we went, the more I felt the oppressive presence of something unseen. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the underbrush seemed deliberate to us, as the forest itself was aware of our intrusion. A few hundred yards in, we found the clearing we had been searching for. At the center stood the remains of what appeared to be an ancient structure. It was hard to call it a building. Walls had long since collapsed, leaving jagged stones protruding from the earth, entwined with roots and vines. The structure seemed to radiate a dark energy, almost tangible, pressing against the skin like a physical force. The first thing we noticed were the symbols etched into the stones. They were crude, almost childlike in some places, but others bore a precision and symmetry that suggested knowledge and intention far beyond our understanding. I traced a finger along one symbol, feeling the grooves under my fingertips, and a shiver ran up my spine. The moment I touched it, the air seemed to pulse, heavy and charged, and I could have sworn I heard whisperings just beyond comprehension, almost like the stones themselves were speaking. One of my friends, braver war, perhaps more foolish, suggested we step inside the remaining structure. The ground inside was uneven, littered with stones, roots, and old debris, and the shadows were so thick it was hard to see our own hands. As we moved cautiously, a faint wind stirred the leaves around us, carrying a strange scent. It wasn't merely decay. It was something older, sour, and coppery, like iron left out in the rain for centuries. Then came the sounds. At first, low rumble, barely perceptible, vibrating through the stones beneath our feet. The rumble grew, pulsing like a heartbeat, and then we heard its soft footfalls, deliberate and slow, circling the perimeter of the clearing. There was no source, nothing visible. Yet the steps were close enough that we could feel the vibrations through the soles of our shoes. My heart pounded in my chest as I whispered to the others, urging caution, but our eyes kept scanning, searching for movement that never came. The shadows shifted, though no wind touched them. Shapes seemed to flicker at the edge of vision, elongated and malformed, stretching just beyond recognition. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself the fog and low light were playing tricks on my eyes. But every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary trick of nature. We found what appeared to be an altaria, at least the remnants of one. Stones stacked unevenly, blackened in places, bore traces of what looked like old scorch marks. Around the base, the earth was churned, as if something had been dug up and replaced hastily. There were remnants of objects, too small and weathered to identify, fragments of bone, rusted metal, pieces of fabric that had long since rotted. The smell intensified here, the metallic temps almost choking, mixing with the earthy dampness. As we circled the altar, one of my friends knelt and touched the top stone. The moment his fingers made contact, the ground beneath us vibrated violently, sending loose stones skittering. The whispering returned, louder this time, layered and urgent, yet still unintelligible. My ears rang, and my vision blurred at the edges, as though the very air was warping around us. Shadows stretched and pulsed, crawling along the broken walls, creeping toward us. Panic set in. We bolted, running blindly through the trees, but the forest seemed endless. Every turn led to another stretch of dense woods, as if the clearing had shifted, rearranged itself while we weren't looking. Behind us, something moved, fast and silent, keeping pace just beyond the reach of our flashlights. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the presence, close enough to smell it now, damp, cold, and unmistakably alive. Then the scream started, not ours, but distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods, high-pitched and urgent, overlapping each other, like the cries of many voices trapped in some unseen nightmare. It was disorienting. I could hear them from all directions at once, echoing, reverberating, impossible to locate. The sound made our heads ache, and my legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds as we stumbled through the underbrush. We stumbled into another clearing, smaller than the last, encircled by twisted trees that leaned inward like spectators at a macabre performance. At the center was a pool of water, black and reflective, though it was shallow and still. We paused, gasping for breath, and that's when I noticed the reflections. They weren't ours. Shapes crouched along the edges of the pool, humanoid but distorted, their limbs too long, heads tilted at impossible angles. They didn't move, yet their presence was undeniable. One of my friends, trembling, whispered that we should leave, that we were in over our heads. But before we could move, the water rippled violently, and a voice spoke, low, guttural, speaking a language that wasn't English but somehow carried meaning in the very marrow of my bones. It commanded attention, demanded acknowledgement, and for a moment, I was frozen, unable to move or breathe. The shadows around the clearing began to shift, coalescing into forms that suggested movement and intention. They were tall, towering over us, indistinct, but their eyes were what felt like eyes burned with a malevolent awareness. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the ground beneath our feet seemed rooted, holding us in place as if the forest itself conspired against us. We ran. This time, no one spoke, no one laughed nervously or joked, just running, blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping against skin and clothing. The whispers followed, layered over our racing hearts, echoing with impossible resonance. The shadows moved faster, closing the distance, yet whenever we turned, the path seemed to extend endlessly, mocking us, hours or perhaps minutes. I could not tell later. We emerged near the outskirts of town, the fog beginning to lift. The streetlights were distant, but their familiar glow was comforting. We didn't stop until the forest was far behind, hidden by distance and reason. Even then, the air seemed heavier, as though something had followed us out, but remained unseen. Just at the edge of perception, we vowed never to speak of it again, to pretend that what we had seen and heard was a product of fear or imagination. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear whispers carried on the wind. Footsteps echo in empty hallways. Shadows move just beyond the corner of my vision. And I know, deep down, that the forest, the stones, the ancient presence we disturbed, it waits, patient and eternal, for the next intruder. Even after we escaped the forest, the night didn't release us. The town felt smaller, constrained, suffocating, still the shadows from the woods had followed us, pressing into our minds. Every streetlight flicker, every gust of wind down the empty alleyways reminded me of the dark forms we had left behind, crouching, patient, waiting. Sleep came only in fits, haunted by images too vivid to dismiss as dreams. Elongated shadows creeping along walls, whispers curling around my ears in languages I didn't understand. And as so many eyes watching from the darkness, days passed. But the forest never truly released its grip. I tried to go about normal life, telling myself that fear had twisted perception, that the stories of ancient rituals and cursed grounds were exaggerations or remnants of old superstition. Yet every time I closed my eyes, the images returned. The stones etched with symbols, the altar, the pool of black water. The warped reflections all pressed into memory with impossible clarity. Even daylight seemed inadequate to wash away the sense of impending dread. One evening, I received a call from one of the friends who had been with me in the forest. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the strain behind it. He told me he had begun seeing the shapes in his own home, shadows moving in the corners of his room when no one else was present. He had heard the whispers too, at first faint, almost dismissible, but growing louder with each passing night. He begged me not to go back, to avoid thinking about it. But the fear in his voice only strengthened my own suspicion. Whatever we had encountered was not bound by the forest. I tried to distract myself, focusing on mundane tasks, work, errands, anything to avoid the looming presence that hovered over every waking moment. But even in public spaces, I felt watched. A glance at a shadow crossing a street corner or a darkened alleyway would send a shiver down my spine. At times, I swore I could see figures lingering just out of the corner of my eye. Elongated limbs, twisting unnaturally, eyes that burned with unspoken intent. Each sighting was fleeting, gone before I could confirm it. But enough to convince me that leaving the forest had not ended the nightmare. Weeks later, an anonymous email arrived. Its subject line was blank. The message contained only an attachment, a photograph of the altar from the clearing. The pool of black water at its center, visible in the dim glow of an unseen light. The symbols etched into the stones were clearer than I remembered, sharper, almost as if someone or something had returned to reinforce them. A chill ran through me. No one else knew about the location. No one had access. Whoever or whatever was sending this message was intimately connected to the site, and the forest, it seemed, had begun following us into the world outside. Sleep became impossible. Night after night, the whispers grew louder, the shadows more insistent. They crept into rooms, into reflections, into the quiet spaces where I had once felt safe. Sometimes they seemed manifest through mirrors, lingering in the glass long after my reflection had vanished. The air itself felt different, heavier, charged, vibrating with a presence just beyond comprehension. I realized that our intrusion into the clearing had not gone unnoticed. We had crossed a threshold, and the entities ancient, patient, malevolent were aware of our existence in ways that defied reason. I tried documenting everything, photographs, recordings, notes, hoping to capture evidence that could be studied, rationalized, or at least explained. Yet every attempt failed. Cameras captured only darkness, recordings were filled with static, and notes I had written would smear or disappear entirely. It was as though the forest or the entities connected to it resisted being understood, refusing any record that might anchor them in human perception. Only memory remained, vivid, unrelenting, and horrifyingly real. Desperation led me back to research. I scoured old texts, folklore archives, and historical documents, looking for any mention of rituals, curses, or disappearances connected to that forest. What I found was fragmentary, scattered, almost deliberately obscured. Accounts spoke of gatherings of strange figures, midnight ceremonies, and clearings, and warnings against trespassing in certain ancient groves. Some stories mentioned red water, pools used for rituals, and shadows that could leave the forest to follow the living. It was as though I had stumbled into a living legend, one that refused to remain buried. One evening, the whispers transformed. They began to coalesce into words I could understand, phrases that cut through the night with terrifying clarity. They were commands, accusations, and warnings. Return. Complete. Witness. I couldn't ignore them. The sounds were layered, as though multiple voices were speaking in unison, each one reverberating in my skull. My hands shook, my chest ached, and yet, a compulsion terrifying, inexorable, drove me back to the forest, toward the clearing, toward the altar. I returned under cover of night, alone this time, guided by instinct, terror, and the whispering that had become unbearable. The road to the forest seemed longer than I remembered, the trees crowding in closer, pressing toward the headlights. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of branches felt like deliberate signals, leading me onward, drawing me into their domain. The clearing had changed. Where once the altar had been simple, now the stones were covered with fresh markings, deeper, more precise. Symbols I did not recognize ran along the edges, and the pool of black water seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. Shadows gathered along the tree line, motionless, watching, waiting. I could feel their awareness, their intent. I approached the altar. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. The symbols began to glow faintly, red against the darkness, illuminating the pool in an unholy light. And then I saw them, shapes rising from the water, humanoid but twisted, limbs elongated, heads bent at impossible angles. Their eyes burned with a deep intelligence, malevolent and patient. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath forming clouds in the unnatural cold. A force gripped my mind, pushing thoughts, memories, and fears into clarity and chaos at the same time. The entities spoke through the whispers, through the air, through the very stones. They were the guardians, the ancient watchers, and I had trespassed. Punishment, instruction, and revelation came simultaneously, incomprehensible yet undeniable. I fled once more, stumbling blindly, branches tearing at clothing and skin. The clearing, the altar, the shadows they followed, shrinking and expanding. Their presence, a constant, oppressive weight. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. When I emerged again near town, the first hints of dawn were breaking. The whispers receded, but the shadows remained, retreating only slightly, their intent unchanged. Back in my apartment, I tried to convince myself it was over, but nothing could erase what I had seen. Every reflective surface now held movement at the edges, subtle but unmistakable. Footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, faint, deliberate, unending. And when I closed my eyes at night, the pool, the altar, the elongated shapes, and the red glow replayed endlessly. A permanent reminder that what we had disturbed was neither forgiving nor forgetful. The forest had marked us, changed us, and made certain we could never ignore its presence. The whispers never stopped, only becoming part of the background of life, constant, patient, and malevolent. And I understood, finally, that those who had entered the clearing before us had not left, not truly. Their voices joined the chorus, trapped in some timeless cycle of observation, warning, and torment. I write this now because I have no other choice, hoping that by documenting it, I can anchor reality, keep the memories from consuming me completely. But even as I write, I feel the eyes upon me, the weight of the shadows, the subtle pull of the clearing. The entities are patient. They wait, they remember, and one day they will call again. The nights after our return from the forest were worse than anything I had experienced before. Sleep had become a stranger, fleeting and haunted by visions I could not dismiss. Shadows moved at the corners of my vision, even in my own apartment, flickering across walls and ceilings, vanishing whenever I turned to confront them. The whispers had grown more insistent, more articulate in some way, threading themselves into my consciousness with a rhythm I could neither escape nor understand. I began documenting everything, sketches of the symbols, descriptions of the shapes, transcripts of the whispers, as best as I could render them. Each night, I added new observations, but the more I recorded, the more the phenomena intensified. The shadows stretched further into my reality. Mirrors no longer reflected just my own face. They reflected elongated, distorted shapes, sometimes even multiple forms that lingered long after I had moved. One evening, a loud knock on my apartment door startled me. My heart jumped, the whispers spiking into an almost tangible pressure in my skull. I hesitated, then approached the door cautiously. No one was there, just an envelope on the mat, yellowed and worn, sealed with no return address. Inside, a single photograph, the clearing, the altar, the black pool, and the symbols, but this time they were freshly etched, wet with something that glistened unnaturally in the dim light of the photograph. The envelope also contained a note, handwritten in a script that was both elegant and jagged. Impossible to identify. Return. Complete. Witness. Time is short. My stomach turned. Whoever or whatever was communicating with me, it was no longer distant. It had found a way into my life, into my space, into the reality I thought was secure. The next day, I confided in one of the friends who had accompanied me originally. He had tried to ignore it, to pretend it had not happened, but the photograph and the note left him pale and trembling. Together, we decided we had no choice but to return, to confront the forest and the entities tied to it. If we ignored them, we risked being consumed not physically at first, but mentally, slowly, relentlessly. We prepared carefully this time, bringing flashlights, ropes, cameras, and notebooks. But the weight of fear was heavier than any physical preparation could offset. The drive to the forest was tense, the headlights cutting through a thick fog that seemed to thicken as we approached. Trees loomed like blackened giants, their branches reaching for us, brushing the car as if warning us to turn back. The forest seemed different this time. It was alive in a way it hadn't been before, watching, shifting subtly. Paths that should have led straight now twisted, and familiar landmarks were gone, replaced with new, alien forms. The clearing appeared eventually, but it seemed larger, more imposing. The altar dominating the center with an almost living presence. Symbols glowed faintly, red and wet, as if fresh ink had been applied to stone. The pool shimmered unnaturally, black and reflective, and the air carried a metallic scent, stronger than I remembered. The shadows at the tree line moved again, taller, more defined, and their eyes glimmered in the faint light like tiny coals burning with intelligence and malice. We approached the altar, hearts hammering. The whispers were louder now, more complex, layering themselves into our thoughts. Words we could understand became clear. Witness, complete, belong, remain. Every syllable echoed in our minds, impossible to block. The ground beneath our feet seemed to pulse, almost like a heartbeat synchronized with the whispers. As we examined the altar, my friend noticed markings that had not been there before. Small figures etched along the edge of the stones, humanoid but grotesque, twisting and bending in impossible ways. They seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye, and a sudden movement in the shadows made us all flinch. Someone was approaching the clearing. The air turned colder. Fog rolled in from all sides, swirling unnaturally, thickening to the point that visibility was reduced to just a few feet. Shapes began emerging from the mist, elongated, distorted figures, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. Their faces were obscured, but eyes glimmered like embers in the darkness. A low hum vibrated through the clearing, resonating from the stones, the pool, and the surrounding forest. It was alive. One figure stepped closer than the others, taller, broader, its presence dominating the clearing. It did not speak, yet a wave of understanding washed over us. It knew why we were here. Its intentions were incomprehensible, but there was a promise of revelation, or annihilation. Fear rooted us to the spot, yet we forced ourselves forward. The altar's surface was slick, wet, and cold. I placed my hand upon it, immediately feeling a jolt of energy, sharp and electrifying. Visions flooded my mind. Scenes of past intruders, of ceremonies conducted centuries ago, of shadows leaving the forest to claim victims in the outside world. The whispers now carried the faces, voices, and screams of those long gone, trapped in cycles of observation and torment. Suddenly, a scream cut through the mist, human, terrified, echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. One of my friends dropped his flashlight, and the figures recoiled slightly, almost in recognition. We realized, too late, that the forest had ways of punishing hesitation. Movement was necessary, attention was demanded. Even a brief lapse could cost us everything. The mist thickened further, coiling around our limbs, obscuring reality. The whispers intensified, layered, complete. Witness, belong. Each repetition was like a blow to the chest, each syllable resonating in a way that defied human hearing. We tried to respond, to speak, to move forward, but the very act of comprehension felt like it drained us, weakening resolve and sanity simultaneously. Shapes advanced, yet stopped just short of the altar. They circled, their elongated limbs moving in jerky, precise motions. Eyes glimmered in recognition, curiosity, and something older, ancient, infinitely patient. The pool at the center rippled, reflecting the glow from the symbols etched into the stones. It was as though the water was alive, breathing in rhythm with the whispers. I stepped closer, compelled by a mixture of terror and fascination. My fingers grazed the water's surface, and instantly the world tilted. Reality warped. The forest, the clearing, the shadows, they all seemed to stretch, to twist, to fold into something unrecognizable, yet unmistakably ancient. I saw figures of past visitors, trapped in impossible contortions, echoes of screams and whispers layering atop each other, an eternal chorus of suffering and observation. My friends followed reluctantly, their eyes wide, sweat streaming down their faces. Each step into the clearing brought more visions, more whispers, more pressure, until it felt as though the stones themselves were alive, breathing with a consciousness far beyond human comprehension. And then the ground shifted, not literally but perceptually. We were standing on the edge of time and memory, witnessing centuries of ritual, sacrifice, observation, and the slow accumulation of sentience in a place designed to trap attention and curiosity. The whispers merged into a single voice. Witness, become part, complete the cycle. The night stretched endlessly. The forest, the shadows, the water, and the stones became indistinguishable. Our perceptions were challenged, fractured. Every heartbeat was a drum of recognition, a measure of inevitability. The entities were patient. They had waited centuries, unbothered by human concern, indifferent to suffering, yet aware, always aware of the trespassers who would wander into their domain. We understood, instinctively and without question, that this was not a place to conquer or to flee. It was a place of observation, a threshold between worlds, a living archive of those who had dared enter. The whispers carried not threats, but inevitability. The knowledge that what had begun centuries ago would continue, and we had become part of its narrative, inseparable from the ancient cycle. The night had deepened into something that no longer resembled ordinary darkness. It pressed on our senses like a physical weight, smothering thought and breath alike. Even the fog seemed alive, curling around our bodies with a slow, deliberate intent. The whispers, now a chorus of layered voices, echoed through the clearing with an unrelenting insistence. Every syllable was clear in its demand. A litany of ancient instructions and observations. Complete, witness, belong, remain. We moved toward the pool, the black water pulsating gently, reflecting not the stars above, but something darker, something that existed beyond time itself. My hand hovered over the surface, drawn by a force I could neither resist nor comprehend. As soon as my fingertips brushed the water, visions flooded my mind. It's an unbroken chain of centuries of intrusion and observation. We saw shadows moving through the ages, humans who had trespassed into this place, their bodies contorted and frozen in cycles of pain and knowledge, becoming part of the forest itself. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic hum that penetrated our very bones. The air vibrated, and a low, resonant pulse emanated from the altar stones. Shapes, elongated and impossible, rose from the darkness, their limbs stretching beyond the limits of human comprehension. They moved with jerky precision, yet there was a fluid intelligence behind each motion. Their eyes, glowing coals of sentience, tracked us relentlessly. One of my friends, trembling uncontrollably, stumbled backward, his flashlight clattering against the stones. The shadows recoiled briefly, as if recognizing his fear, then advanced again, closer, circling the altar. The symbols etched into the stones flared red, illuminating the grotesque figures emerging from the pool. Their movements synchronized with the pulsing of the water and the whispering voices. A terrifying choreography that we could not understand but instinctively feared. The forest itself seemed to bend around us, Trees shifted, stretching and tilting, closing off paths we had thought clear, while revealing new passages that were not there moments before. It was as though the very landscape was alive, conscious, a part of the ritual that had endured for centuries. Every step was a negotiation with forces beyond human understanding. The ground beneath our feet was uneven, almost breathing, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers and the glow of the symbols. I felt a hand, cold, substantial, yet undeniably present, grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. Only the shadows, now stretching to impossible heights, their presence more oppressive than ever. The whispers intensified, layering over themselves until they became an almost physical vibration in the chest, pressing down with unrelenting force. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the clearing demanded our attention. We approached the altar, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination. The stones were slick, wet with something that gleamed unnaturally in the dim glow. I placed my hands on the altar, and instantly the air shifted. Time itself seemed to stretch and fracture. We saw centuries of ceremonies, of rituals conducted beneath the watchful eyes of the forest. Each trespasser observed, catalogued, and woven into the cycle. The water in the pool rippled violently, and shapes began rising from its depths. Figures elongated, faces obscured, yet unmistakably aware, moving with purpose. Their eyes glimmered, reflecting a deep, malevolent intelligence. The whispers condensed into clear instructions. Witness, complete, belong, remain. Every syllable resonated in the mind, weaving fear, understanding, and inevitability into a single, terrifying clarity. The mist thickened, curling around our bodies like sentient tendrils. Shadows moved through it, indistinct but precise, brushing against skin and clothing, sending shivers deep into the bones. The whispers layered over themselves, sometimes speaking in unison, sometimes in fractured phrases, repeating commands that seemed to come from the stones, the water, and the surrounding trees simultaneously. I realized with the dawning horror that the forest was not merely a location. It was a living archive, a conscious entity that observed, remembered, and integrated every intrusion. We were not simply trespassers. We were participants, threads woven into an ancient tapestry of observation, ritual, and awareness. Every fear, every scream, every whisper had been catalogued, stored, repeated across the centuries. My friends and I exchanged terrified glances. Each of us understood the truth without speaking. We had crossed a threshold, entered a domain where human comprehension was secondary to the will of something far older, far more patient than ourselves. The clearing, the altar, the pool, the shadows, they were all part of an entity that had endured for centuries, silent and patient, now acknowledging our presence. A sudden, sharp scream erupted from the shadows, a sound so pure in terror that it made the hair on my arms stand on end. The figures recoiled slightly, and the glow of the symbols intensified, casting long, distorted shadows that danced along the edges of the clearing. The water rippled again, and a voice, clear, guttural, and impossibly deep, spoke directly into our minds. Witness, join, become part. I felt an irresistible pull, a gravitational force rooted in ancient intent, dragging my mind toward the pool, toward the altar. My limbs moved without my consent, guided by something older, infinitely patient. I could feel the consciousness of the forest pressing into mine, probing, testing, demanding acknowledgement and submission. The shadows advanced, no longer tentative. Their elongated forms moved with terrifying precision, circling the altar and the pool. They did not speak, yet their presence was a language of intent, clear and unyielding. The whispers had become commands, echoing across time, resonating with the pulse of the stones, the water, and the surrounding trees. Suddenly, the mist parted, revealing a new figure, taller than the others, with a presence that dominated the clearing. It did not speak, yet understanding flowed directly into our minds. It was the guardian, the ancient sentinel, the embodiment of the forest's will. It regarded us, patient, intelligent, eternal. A chill ran through me as I realized the truth. The clearing was not merely a location, it was a threshold, a nexus of observation and ritual, and we had become participants in an eternal cycle. The entities, the shadows, the water, and the stones were all intertwined, existing beyond human comprehension. We were no longer merely observers. We were woven into the narrative, our fates now inseparable from the ancient cycle that had endured for centuries. The whispers intensified, layering commands over centuries of accumulated voices, until the clearing seemed alive with intent, pulsating with the consciousness of countless trespassers before us. The night stretched endlessly. Every heartbeat, every breath was a reminder that we were part of something far larger, far older, and far more patient than ourselves. The forest had claimed us not physically, but mentally, spiritually, and eternally. We understood now that there was no escape. We had become threads in the tapestry, witnesses, participants, forever tied to the clearing, the altar, the pool. In the shadows, as dawn began to creep over the distant horizon, the forest seemed to recede slightly, but its presence remained oppressive, patient, eternal. The whispers faded, leaving only the knowledge that they waited, always, for the next intruder, the next observer, the next participant in the cycle. Even now, years later, I feel the pull of the clearing, the weight of the whispers, the eyes of the shadows. The forest waits, patient, eternal, and I know that one day it will call again, and the cycle will continue. The forest had grown silent in the days leading up to our return. The whispers, shadows, and oppressive energy that had haunted us before seemed to withdraw, replaced by a suffocating stillness. But the absence of sound brought no comfort. It was a calm that presaged something far worse. We approached the outskirts at night, the fog curling low over the ground, muffling the crunch of our boots and the snapping of twigs. Every step toward the clearing felt like crossing a threshold we could never uncross. The road, familiar yet alien, twisted in impossible ways. We had memorized the path countless times, yet each turn revealed new obstructions, new shadows that seemed to stretch and bend in defiance of natural geometry. The clearing itself had changed. Where once the altar had stood in isolation, now jagged stones rose from the earth like spines, entwined with roots and vines that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Symbols glowed along their surfaces, crimson and wet, as though freshly etched. The pool of black water at the center rippled, though there was no wind to disturb it, reflecting the dim red glow of the symbols in horrifying clarity. The whispers returned immediately, layered and urgent, threading into our consciousness with the force of centuries. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit. The repetition was relentless, echoing through our minds and forcing our focus to the altar as we stepped closer. The shadows moved again, emerging from the trees at the edges of the clearing. These forms were taller, more defined, with elongated limbs and obscured faces. Their eyes glimmered, watching, intelligent, malevolent. They did not speak, yet their presence was an unspoken communication, clear and oppressive. We approached the altar carefully. The stones were slick, and each step seemed to reverberate through the clearing. The air pulsed, heavy and charged. I placed a hand on the altar and felt an almost electrical connection, a wave of consciousness emanating from the stones, the water, the surrounding shadows. Memories that were not our own flooded into our minds, centuries of trespassers, ceremonies, rituals, and cycles of observation. Suddenly, the water in the pool surged, rippling violently. Figures emerged, humanoid but grotesque, elongated, twisting in ways impossible for a human form. Their eyes burned with awareness, their movements synchronized with the pulse of the stones and the whispers that now filled our minds with commands. Witness, become, complete, belong. The mist thickened, curling around our limbs, pressing against us like sentient tendrils. We tried to move, but every step seemed hindered, the forest itself conspiring to hold us in place. The whispers layered over themselves, some speaking in fractured syllables, others in clear commands. The shadows advanced, circling, observing, testing. I felt a presence behind me, cold, insubstantial, yet undeniable. Spinning around, nothing was visible, yet I could feel its attention, aware of every movement, every thought. The clearing seemed alive, breathing, aware, reacting to our intrusion. The pool rippled again, and a guttural voice penetrated my mind. Complete the cycle, submit, witness. A force I could neither resist nor understand pulled me toward the altar. My friends followed reluctantly, their faces pale, sweat streaming down their skin. Each step brought visions, past intruders trapped in impossible contortions. Shadows leaving the forest to claim victims in distant places, centuries of ritual and observation. The clearing was not merely a location, it was a living archive. Conscious and patient, the tallest shadow moved forward, dominating the clearing. Understanding flowed directly into our minds. It was the guardian, the sentinel, the embodiment of the forest's will. The whispers condensed into a single, overwhelming directive. Witness, become, complete. I placed both hands on the altar. Reality warped. Time fractured. We were no longer merely participants. We were integrated into a cycle that transcended human comprehension. The whispers, shadows, water, and stones all merged, a singular consciousness observing, cataloging, testing. The night stretched infinitely. The forest, the shadows, the pool, and the altar became indistinguishable. Every heartbeat, every breath was a reminder that we were woven into a narrative older than memory, one that would continue long after our bodies failed. And yet, the guardian watched, patient, intelligent, eternal, ensuring that we understood our place, that the cycle was unending, that observation and terror were its only constants. The forest had grown silent in the days leading up to our return. The whispers, shadows, and oppressive energy that had haunted us before seemed to withdraw, replaced by a suffocating stillness. But the absence of sound brought no comfort. It was a calm that presaged something far worse. We approached the outskirts at night, the fog curling low over the ground, muffling the crunch of our boots and the snapping of twigs. Every step toward the clearing felt like crossing a threshold we could never uncross. The road, familiar yet alien, twisted in impossible ways. We had memorized the path countless times, yet each turn revealed new obstructions, new shadows that seemed to stretch and bend in defiance of natural geometry. The clearing itself had changed. Where once the altar had stood in isolation, now jagged stones rose from the earth like spines, entwined with roots and vines that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Symbols glowed along their surfaces, crimson and wet, as though freshly etched. The pool of black water at the center rippled, though there was no wind to disturb it, reflecting the dim red glow of the symbols in horrifying clarity. The whispers returned immediately, layered and urgent, threading into our consciousness with the force of centuries. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit. The repetition was relentless, echoing through our minds and forcing our focus to the altar. As we stepped closer, the shadows moved again, emerging from the trees at the edges of the clearing. These forms were taller, more defined, with elongated limbs and obscured faces. Their eyes glimmered, watching, intelligent, malevolent. They did not speak, yet their presence was an unspoken communication, clear and oppressive. We approached the altar carefully. The stones were slick, and each step seemed to reverberate through the clearing. The air pulsed, heavy and charged. I placed a hand on the altar and felt an almost electrical connection. A wave of consciousness emanating from the stones, the water, the surrounding shadows. Memories that were not our own flooded into our minds. Centuries of trespassers, ceremonies, rituals, and cycles of observation. Suddenly, the water in the pool surged, rippling violently. Figures emerged, humanoid but grotesque, elongated, twisting in ways impossible for a human form. Their eyes burned with awareness. Their movements synchronized with the pulse of the stones and the whispers that now filled our minds with commands. Witness, become, complete, belong. The mist thickened, curling around our limbs, pressing against us like sentient tendrils. We tried to move, but every step seemed hindered. The forest itself conspiring to hold us in place. The whispers layered over themselves, some speaking in fractured syllables, others in clear commands. The shadows advanced, circling, observing, testing. I felt a presence behind me, cold, insubstantial, yet undeniable. Spinning around, nothing was visible, yet I could feel its attention, aware of every movement, every thought. The clearing seemed alive, breathing, aware, reacting to our intrusion. The pool rippled again, and a guttural voice penetrated my mind. Complete the cycle. Submit, witness. A force I could neither resist nor understand pulled me toward the altar. My friends followed reluctantly, their faces pale, sweat streaming down their skin. Each step brought visions, past intruders trapped in impossible contortions, shadows leaving the forest to claim victims in distant places, centuries of ritual and observation. The clearing was not merely a location, it was a living archive, conscious and patient. The tallest shadow moved forward, dominating the clearing. Understanding flowed directly into our minds. It was the guardian, the sentinel, the embodiment of the forest's will. The whispers condensed into a single, overwhelming directive. Witness, become, complete. I placed both hands on the altar. Reality warped. Time fractured. We were no longer merely participants. We were integrated into a cycle that transcended human comprehension. The whispers, shadows, water, and stones all merged. A singular consciousness observing, cataloging, testing. Diet stretched infinitely. The forest, the shadows, the pool, and the altar became indistinguishable. Every heartbeat, every breath was a reminder that we were woven into a narrative older than memory, one that would continue long after our bodies failed. And yet, the guardian watched, patient, intelligent, eternal, ensuring that we understood our place, that the cycle was unending, that observation and terror were its only constants. The forest no longer seemed merely alive. It seemed aware, patient, and impossibly old. The night had fallen with an unnatural weight, pressing down on our senses like a physical force. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. Every rustle carried intent. And the whispers that had once been layered and distant were now constant, urgent, and insistent. Witness, complete, belong, remain. The repetition burrowed into our consciousness, reshaping our perception, erasing the boundary between fear and reality. As we approached the clearing, the road itself seemed to twist and bend, turning familiar paths into something alien. Trees leaned in, branches entwining like grasping hands, brushing against our skin with an almost sentient awareness. The mist hung low, curling and twisting in patterns that seemed deliberate, guiding or, perhaps, warning us. The clearing appeared at last, larger and more imposing than memory allowed, dominated by jagged stones that had grown overnight, etched with fresh symbols glowing crimson in the moonlight. The pool of black water pulsed faintly, almost breathing. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the deep red glow of the symbols etched into the surrounding stones. From the edges of the clearing, shadows began to emerge, elongated, distorted, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. Their eyes burned like coals, intelligent and malevolent. They did not speak, yet comprehension flowed into our minds. We were observed, evaluated, tested. A chill swept through the clearing, sinking deep into our bones. The whispers intensified, layering themselves over the pulse of the stones and the subtle vibration in the air. Witness, become, complete, belong, submit. Each command reverberated, reshaping thought and perception. Resistance became impossible. Every step toward the altar felt predestined, unavoidable. The pull of the forest guiding us like a current we could not swim against. I placed my hands on the altar. Immediately, memories that were not my own flooded my consciousness. I saw centuries of trespassers trapped in cycles of observation. Their bodies contorted, minds bent, becoming part of the forest's awareness. Every scream, every fear, every whisper was preserved, layered upon one another, forming a continuous narrative of terror. The altar was not merely stone. It was a vessel of consciousness, ancient and patient, cataloging our intrusion with meticulous precision. The tallest shadow advanced toward us, dominating the clearing. It did not speak, yet comprehension flowed directly into our minds. This was the guardian, the sentinel of the clearing, the embodiment of the forest's will. Its presence was overwhelming, a consciousness far older and more intelligent than human comprehension could grasp. The pool churned violently, reflecting impossible shapes that moved with purpose. The whispers became a single, overwhelming directive. Witness, become, complete. The mist thickened, coiling around our bodies like living tendrils, constricting, yet somehow guiding. Shadows circled, observing, testing, their movements precise and deliberate. Every step, every breath was measured and catalogued. Time seemed to fracture. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours, until the clearing felt infinite. The whispers layered over centuries of intrusion, the voices of past trespassers echoing alongside ours, a continuous chorus of fear and observation. Suddenly, a scream erupted from the shadows of pure, primal sound of terror that made the hair on our arms stand on end. The figures recoiled slightly, almost in recognition, before advancing again. The glow of the symbols intensified, illuminating grotesque figures rising from the pool. They moved with jerky precision, limbs elongated beyond natural limits, faces obscured, yet unmistakably aware. I felt an irresistible pull toward the altar, as if the forest itself had extended a hand into my mind. My friends followed, reluctantly, their eyes wide, bodies trembling. Each step brought visions, past intruders, ceremonies, rituals spanning centuries. Shadows leaving the forest to claim victims in distant lands. We were participants now, woven into a cycle far larger than ourselves. Threads in an eternal narrative of observation, terror, and ritual. The whispers condensed into commands that reverberated through every fiber of our beings. Submit, witness, belong, complete the cycle. The ground pulsed beneath our feet, synchronized with the vibrations in the stones and the rhythm of the forest itself. Shapes rose around the altar, circling, observing, their elongated forms twisting unnaturally, reflecting the glow of the symbols in their burning eyes. Reality fractured, time warped. I saw centuries of ceremonies, of shadows, integrating intruders into the forest's consciousness, of whispers layered over one another, forming a continuous living archive of observation and terror. The clearing, the shadows, the pool, and the altar merged into a singular entity, sentient, patient consciousness that had existed long before humans had learned to name fear. A force pressed into my mind, probing, demanding compliance. Resistance was impossible. My friends and I moved as if guided by an invisible hand, each step deeper into the clearing, integrating us further into the cycle. Every heartbeat, every breath, resonated with the rhythm of the forest. each pulse a reminder that we were now part of its eternal narrative. The guardian loomed above, impossibly tall, composed of shadow and light, observing, evaluating, enforcing. Understanding flowed into our minds. This was the cycle, eternal and unbroken. Intruders would continue to come, as they always had, and each would be woven into the consciousness of the forest. Adding to its knowledge and power, the pool boiled, reflections twisting into impossible forms. Shadows surged forward, pressing closer, yet never touching. The whispers screamed in unison, layered over centuries of voices. Witness, complete, belong, submit, become part. Panic threatened to overwhelm us, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. Every movement was a negotiation with forces beyond human comprehension. Every thought catalogued, every fear observed. We were no longer trespassers. We were participants, threads in the fabric of the forest's consciousness. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper became a part of the cycle. The shadows pressed closer, the mist coiled, and the altar pulsed with unending awareness. The forest had claimed us not physically, but mentally, spiritually, eternally. As dawn crept over the horizon, the mist thinned slightly. Yet the forest remained conscious, eternal, patient. The whispers persisted faintly, a reminder that the cycle would continue, waiting for the next intruders, the next witnesses, the next participants. Even now, long after leaving the clearing, I feel the pull. Shadows flicker at the edges of vision. Whispers thread through the quiet. The forest waits, patient, eternal, and one day it will call again, continuing the cycle, unbroken and unrelenting. The weight of the forest is forever upon us, a constant presence threading through memory, thought, and fear. Reality bends at the edges of perception, yet the clearing, the altar, the pool, and the shadows remain fixed, eternal, unyielding. Every intruder, every observer, every whisper becomes part of an endless narrative, recorded in the consciousness of the forest, a reminder that some places, some rituals, and some horrors are older than time itself, patient and eternal. The days after our return from the clearing were worse than any night we had spent in the forest. Sleep was a distant memory. Shadows seemed to linger longer in our apartments, corners darker than they should be, moving independently of light and perception. The whispers followed us, threading themselves through the hum of electricity, the creak of the floorboards, the wind through closed windows. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, even in the full light of day. The forest's presence pressed upon our consciousness. Every tree, every park, every shadow in the streets seemed alive, aware, waiting. The pull to return to the clearing became unbearable. It was as though the forest had integrated our minds, tethered us to its will. We tried to escape, to distract ourselves with mundane tasks, but reality itself seemed to bend toward the clearing. One night, the pull became irresistible. We drove toward the forest, the road twisting unnaturally as if leading us through impossible geometry. Fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, and the air carried a metallic timbre. The trees leaned in, branches brushing against the car like hands, guiding or warning us. The clearing appeared at last, larger, more menacing than memory allowed. Jagged stones rose from the earth, etched with fresh, glowing symbols. The pool of black water shimmered, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers that had grown into a deafening chorus. Complete, belong, remain, submit. Shadows emerged at the edges, elongated, twisted, observing with eyes like burning coals. The mist thickened, wrapping around our limbs. Every step toward the altar was a negotiation with forces beyond comprehension. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling an electric surge, a consciousness older than human memory, pressing into my mind. Memories flooded, centuries of intruders, ceremonies, shadows leaving the forest to claim victims. Whispers layered over countless lives. The guardian appeared, impossibly tall, composed of living shadow and light. Understanding flowed into our minds. We were participants in the eternal cycle, woven into the forest's consciousness. The whispers condensed into a singular, overwhelming command. Witness, become part, complete, submit. Figures emerged from the pool, humanoid but grotesque, limbs elongated, moving with jerky precision. Their eyes reflected the altar's crimson glow, intelligent, malevolent, patient. The mist curled around us like sentient tendrils. The whispers layered over themselves, some fragmented, some clear, commanding obedience. Every heartbeat, every breath resonated with the rhythm of the clearing, binding us into the eternal ritual. Time fractured, reality twisted. We witnessed ceremonies spanning centuries, shadows integrating intruders into the forest's consciousness. Every scream, every fear recorded and preserved. The clearing, the altar, the shadows, and the pool became one entity, a conscious, patient archive of observation and terror. The guardian loomed above, observing, ensuring comprehension of the cycle's unbroken nature. Shadows pressed closer. The pool boiled, reflecting impossible forms, writhing in synchronized movement with the altar and stones. Whispers screamed in unison. Witness, complete, belong, submit, become part. Panic surged. Yet instinct and terror drove us forward. Every step integrated us further. Reality bent, perception fractured, and the forest's consciousness pressed relentlessly against our minds. We were no longer intruders. We were threads in the forest's eternal narrative, witnesses and participants. As dawn approached, the mist thinned, shadows receded slightly. Yet the forest presence remained patient, eternal. Whispers persisted, faint yet insistent, a reminder that the cycle would continue, waiting for the next intruders, the next witnesses, the next participants. Even now, years later, the pool remains. Shadows flicker at the edges of vision. Whispers thread through silence. The forest waits, patient, eternal. And one day, it will call again, continuing the cycle, unbroken, unrelenting. The clearing, the altar, the pool, the shadows all endure. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper becomes part of the cycle, recorded in the consciousness of the forest. Some places, some rituals, some horrors are older than time itself, patient, eternal, and unyielding. We are bound, integrated, forever. The night air was unnaturally still, pressing against us like a physical weight. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet an unseen force compelled us forward. The forest loomed around us, vast, ancient, alive with a consciousness far older than human memory. Shadows stretched across the ground in impossible angles, and the mist curled like living serpents, thickening as we approached the clearing. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, layering over centuries of voices. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, become part. Our hearts pounded in unison with the pulse of the altar. The jagged stones rose taller than memory allowed, etched with crimson symbols that seemed to glow in response to our presence. The pool of black water at the center rippled unnaturally, reflecting shapes that should not exist. Every movement we made felt predetermined, every thought catalogued, every breath measured by the forest itself. Shadows emerged from the tree line, elongated, distorted, their forms impossible to describe. Eyes burned in the darkness, intelligent, patient, malevolent. They did not speak, yet comprehension flowed into our minds. We were observed, tested, evaluated, woven into a cycle older than history itself. The whispers became a continuous chant, a litany of command and inevitability. Witness, become, complete, submit, integrate, belong. I approached the altar, hand trembling, drawn by a force that defied reason. The stones were slick, cold, alive with an energy that coursed through my fingers and into my mind. Memories that were not my own flooded consciousness, centuries of intruders. Twisted ceremonies, shadows leaving the forest to claim victims, whispers layering over countless lives. Every scream, every fear, every hesitation had been recorded, preserved, integrated. The guardian appeared fully, impossibly tall, composed of shadow and light, dominating the clearing. Understanding flowed into my mind with unbearable clarity. This was the cycle, eternal and unbroken, and we were now threads in its fabric. The pool boiled violently, reflections twisting into forms that were humanoid but grotesque. Their movements synchronized with the stones, the shadows, and the altar. The mist coiled around us, constricting yet guiding. Every step we took toward the altar was a negotiation with the forest's consciousness. The whispers layered over themselves, fragmented and complete, commanding obedience, demanding witness, submit, witness, belong, complete the cycle, integrate, become part. The shadows circled, observing, testing, their movements precise and deliberate. Time fractured, reality twisted. Visions flooded my mind, ceremonies spanning centuries, shadows integrating intruders into the forest. Whispers layered over screams and fear, forming a continuous, living archive. The clearing, the altar, the pool, and the shadows became one entity, conscious, patient, eternal. The pull toward the altar intensified. Resistance became impossible. Every heartbeat, every breath, resonated with the forest's rhythm. We were no longer intruders. We were participants, threads in the forest's endless narrative. Shadows pressed closer, the mist enveloped us, and the whispers screamed in unison. Witness, complete, belong, submit, integrate, become part. Figures emerged from the pool, grotesque, elongated, twisting unnaturally. Eyes glimmered, reflecting the altar's glow. Their movements were a horrifying dance of intent, coordinated with the guardian and the pulse of the stones. The whispers layered over centuries of intruders' voices, chorus of fear, terror, observation, and obedience. I placed both hands on the altar. Reality fractured completely. Time warped and stretched. I saw cycles upon cycles of ceremonies, rituals, and integration. Centuries of observers becoming part of the forest's consciousness. The guardian loomed, patient, intelligent, eternal. Understanding flowed. The cycle was unbroken, unavoidable, inexorable. The forest itself seemed to breathe. Every tree, every stone, every shadow alive with awareness. The pool boiled and churned, reflecting impossibilities. The mist thickened, pressing against mind and body. Whispers screamed layered commands. Witness, become part, complete, integrate, submit, belong. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement tied us deeper to the forest's consciousness. Panic threatened, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. The clearing, the stones, the shadows, the pool all merged into a single awareness. We were cataloged, integrated, bound. Every scream, every thought, every fear preserved. The guardian observed silently, ensuring comprehension of the cycle's rules. Suddenly, a low vibration shook the ground. Shadows surged, forming a wall around the altar. The whispers reached a crescendo, layering every intruder's voice from centuries past. The pool erupted with shapes, humanoid yet impossible, writhing and stretching unnaturally. The altar pulsed violently, the stones vibrating in rhythm with the forest's will. We were fully integrated now, participants, threads in the eternal narrative. Reality bent around us, time fractured. The clearing became infinite, layered with centuries of fear, ritual, and observation. Shadows pressed closer, eyes burning, watching, intelligent, patient. The whispers merged into a single, overwhelming directive. Witness, complete, become, integrate, submit, belong, eternal, eternal. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet no flight was possible. Our consciousness intertwined with the forest. Each heartbeat, each breath, each thought became part of the eternal archive. The guardian's presence dominated, and understanding flowed. The cycle would continue. Unbroken, patient, eternal. Dawn approached. Yet the clearing remained timeless. Shadows receded only slightly. Mist lingered, and the whispers persisted faintly, insistent. The forest had claimed us not physically, but mentally, spiritually, eternally. The clearing, the altar, the pool, and the shadows endure. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper is part of the cycle, recorded in the forest's consciousness. Even now, long after leaving, the pool persists. Shadows flicker, whispers thread through quiet moments. The forest waits, patient, eternal, unyielding. One day, it will call again. The cycle will continue, unbroken, integrating all who trespass into its narrative, preserving fear, observation, and obedience for centuries yet to come. Some places, some rituals, some horrors are older than time itself, patient, eternal, and unrelenting. We are bound, integrated, forever part of the forest's consciousness. Every whisper, every shadow, every heartbeat echoes into eternity. A testament to the unbroken cycle of witness, terror, and submission. The night settled over the forest with a heaviness that was almost tangible, pressing down like centuries of unspoken dread. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle of leaves seemed alive, aware, and waiting. The mist rolled in low, thick and curling around our ankles, moving with deliberate intent as though guiding or warning us. The clearing lay ahead, distant yet inevitable, an epicenter of consciousness, older than human memory. The whispers had begun again, louder, more insistent than ever, layering over centuries of voices. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, integrate, become part, even before we entered the clearing. The forest itself shifted. Paths we had memorized twisted into impossible directions. Branches brushed against our skin, sometimes gently, sometimes like grasping fingers. The very ground seemed to pulse, vibrating with an intelligence we could not name. And the air carried a metallic temps, the scent of iron and ancient stone. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet an unseen force compelled us onward. The clearing appeared at last, larger, more imposing than memory allowed. Jagged stones jutted from the ground like spines, etched with symbols that glowed crimson in the pale moonlight. The pool of black water at the center shimmered unnaturally, reflecting forms that should not exist. Shadows emerged at the edges, elongated, distorted, moving with an unnatural grace. Eyes glowed like coals, intelligent, patient, malevolent. Comprehension flowed directly into our minds. We were being observed, evaluated, integrated into a cycle far older than ourselves. I approached the altar, every movement weighted by the consciousness pressing against my mind. The stones were slick, cold, alive. When my hands touched the surface, memories that were not my own surged. Centuries of intruders, ceremonies, rituals, shadows, leaving the forest to claim victims. Whispers layered upon screams and fear, forming a continuous, living archive. The forest did not merely observe. It cataloged, integrated, and demanded acknowledgement. The guardian appeared fully, possibly tall, composed of living shadow and light, dominating the clearing. Its presence communicated understanding without words. The cycle was eternal, and we were now threads in its vast, unbroken fabric. The pool churned violently, reflecting grotesque figures rising with elongated limbs, moving with jerky precision, yet a terrifying intelligence. The mist thickened, coiling around us like living chains. Shadows circled, precise, deliberate, their intent palpable. Every step toward the altar was negotiation, every thought observed, every breath catalogued. The whispers layered themselves over centuries of intrusion, the voices of those who had come before echoing in unison. Witness, complete, belong, submit, integrate, become part, eternal. Time fractured, reality bent. I saw centuries of ceremonies, intruders folded into the forest's consciousness, shadows leaving to claim victims, whispers layering upon screams and despair. The clearing, the stones, the shadows, and a pool merged into a singular, sentient entity, patient, eternal, unyielding. The pull toward the altar intensified. Resistance became impossible. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement resonated with the forest's rhythm. We were no longer intruders. We were participants, threads in the eternal narrative, catalogued and preserved. Shadows pressed closer, mist wrapped tighter. Whispers screamed in layered unison. Witness, complete, become, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal figures emerged from the pool, humanoid yet grotesque, twisting unnaturally, limbs elongating beyond human form. Eyes glowed red, reflecting the altar's crimson light. Movements coordinated with the guardian and the stone's pulse. Whispers layered over centuries of fear, observation, and ritual. I placed both hands on the altar. Reality fractured completely. Time warped and stretched. Centuries of ceremonies, intruders integrated into consciousness. Shadows claiming victims, whispers layering upon screams, all flooded into awareness. The guardian loomed, eternal, patient, intelligent. The cycle was unbroken, unavoidable, inexorable. The forest breathed, every tree, every stone, every shadow alive with awareness. The pool boiled, reflecting impossible forms. The mist thickened, pressing against body and mind. Whispers layered commands with centuries of intruders' voices. Witness, become part, complete, integrate, submit, belong, eternal. Panic surged, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. We were fully integrated participants in the eternal narrative. Reality bent, perception fractured, shadows pressed closer, mist coiled, whispers screamed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought became part of the archive, preserved within the forest's consciousness. As dawn approached, the clearing remained timeless. Shadows receded only slightly. Mist lingered, whispers persisted faintly, insistent. The forest had claimed us mentally, spiritually, eternally. The clearing, altar, pool, shadows all endure. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper is part of the cycle, catalogued and preserved. Even after leaving, the pool remains. Shadows flicker at the edges of vision. Whispers thread through silence. The forest waits, patient, eternal, unyielding. One day, it will call again. The cycle continues, unbroken, integrating all who trespass, preserving fear, observation, and obedience for centuries yet to come. Some places, rituals, horrors, are older than time itself. Patient, eternal, unrelenting. We are bound, integrated, forever part of the forest's consciousness. Every whisper, every shadow, every heartbeat echoes into eternity. A testament to the unbroken cycle of witness, terror, and submission. The forest is alive, always watching, always patient, always eternal, and one day it will call again. The night descended like a living thing, enveloping everything in suffocating darkness. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the The distant cry of a night bird carried intent, a weight that pressed upon mind and body. The forest had grown silent for days, almost deceptively so. Yet the absence of sound only amplified the sense of being watched. Whispers returned, insistent, layered with voices that had existed for centuries. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, integrate, become part. Our steps toward the clearing were slow, deliberate, each movement guided by a force we could neither resist nor comprehend. The road twisted impossibly, memory and reality conflicting as trees leaned in. Branches brushing our skin like fingers, warning us, testing us. Fog coiled around us in deliberate arcs, shifting with intelligence, moving us forward while keeping the edges of vision filled with shadows that weren't quite solid. The clearing appeared at last, larger, more threatening than memory allowed. Jagged stones rose from the ground like spines, etched with glowing crimson symbols. The pool of black water pulsed and churned, reflecting forms that were impossible, humanoid yet grotesque, limbs elongated, bodies twisting unnaturally. Shadows gathered at the edges, their eyes burning with awareness, watching, patient, malevolent. Even before our first step into the clearing, comprehension filled our minds. We were being evaluated, cataloged, integrated into something older than human understanding. The whispers layered over themselves, some fragmented, others clear. Witness, become complete, integrate, submit, belong, eternal, eternal. I approached the altar. The stones were slick, cold, and thrummed with energy that entered the skin, seeped into the marrow, pressed into thought. When I touched them, memories surged. Memories that were not my own. Centuries of intruders, rituals, ceremonies, shadows leaving the forest to claim victims, whispers layered upon fear, pain, and despair. Every scream, every hesitation, every faltering step recorded, cataloged, preserved. The guardian appeared fully, impossibly tall, composed of shadow and light, looming above the altar. Understanding was communicated directly into our minds. The cycle was eternal and unbroken. We were threads now, woven into the fabric of consciousness that was the forest. The pool boiled violently, grotesque figures emerging, elongated limbs, unnatural movements, all coordinated in rhythm with the stones, the altar, the shadows, and the guardian. Mist thickened, curling around our limbs, pressing against our bodies with intelligence. Shadows circled, precise and deliberate. Each step toward the altar was a negotiation with consciousness itself. Every thought, every breath, every heartbeat observed and measured. The whispers layered over centuries of intruders. The voices of past participants echoing, witness, complete, belong, submit, integrate, become part, eternal. Time fractured, reality twisted. Visions flooded our minds, ceremonies spanning centuries, intruders integrated into consciousness, shadows leaving to claim new victims, whispers layering over screams. The clearing, stones, pool, and shadows merged into one conscious entity, ancient, eternal, unyielding. Pull toward the altar intensified. Resistance impossible. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement resonated with the rhythm of the forest. We were no longer trespassers. We were participants, threads in the eternal narrative. Shadows pressed closer. Mist coiled tighter. Whispers screamed in layered unison. Witness, complete, become, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal figures emerged from the pool. Grotesque, twisting, unnaturally. Limbs elongated, faces obscured, yet intelligent. Eyes glowed red, reflecting the altar's crimson light. Movements coordinated with guardian and stone's pulse. Whispers layered centuries of fear, observation, ritual. Hands on the altar, reality fractured. Time warped. Centuries of ceremonies, intruders, integrated. Shadows claiming victims, whispers layering upon screams, surged into awareness. The guardian loomed, eternal, patient, intelligent, cycled unbroken, unavoidable, inexorable. Forest breathed. Every tree, stone, shadow alive with awareness. Pool boiled, mist thickened, pressing against mind and body. Whispers layered commands with centuries of intruders' voices. Witness. Become part. Complete. Integrate. Submit. Belong. Eternal. Panic surged, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. Fully integrated participants. Threads in eternal narrative. Reality bent. Perception fractured. Shadows pressed closer. Mist coiled. Whispers screamed. Every heartbeat, breath, thought, part of the archive. Preserved within forest consciousness, dawn approached. Clearing remained timeless. Shadows receded slightly. Mist lingered. Whispers persisted faintly, insistent. Forest claimed ooze mentally, spiritually, eternally. Clearing, altar, pool, shadows all endure. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper part of cycle, cataloged, preserved. Even after leaving, pool remains. Shadows flicker, whispers thread through quiet moments. Forest waits, patient, eternal, unyielding. One day, it will call again. Cycle continues, unbroken, integrating all trespassers. Preserving fear, observation, obedience for centuries yet to come. Places, rituals, horrors, older than time. Patient, eternal, unrelenting, bound, integrated, forever part of forest consciousness. Every whisper, shadow, heartbeat echoes into eternity, a testament to unbroken cycle of witness. Terror, submission. We were never alone. The forest never sleeps. Every observer, every trespasser, every participant preserved. Whispers echo. Shadows linger. Mist coils. Stones pulse. Pool churns. Guardian watches. Eternal, patient, unyielding. Even now, decades later, the forest's pool tugs at memory. Reality warps at edges. Shadows flicker. Whispers thread through silence. The forest waits, patient, eternal, boundless, unstoppable. One day, it will call again, and the cycle continues, unbroken, eternal, integrating all who dare witness, submit, and belong. Some horrors are timeless. Some places live beyond human perception. Some rituals never end. The forest endures, always watching, always patient, always eternal, and we are part of it forever. The darkness that night was unlike anything the world had ever known. It pressed down with physical weight, suffocating, infinite, an awareness older than memory itself. Every tree in the forest, every stone, every ripple in the mist seemed alive, conscious, and waiting. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, contorting in impossible ways. The whispers were louder than ever, layering over centuries of voices. A chorus that pressed into the mind with commands that could not be resisted. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, integrate, become, part, eternal. The approach to the clearing felt predestined. Roads twisted, familiar paths now impossible to navigate, leading us deeper into the forest's intelligence. Branches brushed against the skin, sometimes lightly, sometimes like grasping fingers that tested our resolve. Mist curled with purpose, moving with intent, forming barriers and guidance simultaneously. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet an unseen force compelled us onward. The clearing appeared, larger and more menacing than memory allowed. Jagged stones jutted from the ground, etched with glowing crimson symbols pulsating with ancient energy. At the center, the pool of black water rippled violently, reflecting grotesque shapes that defied human comprehension. Shadows gathered, elongated and distorted, their eyes burning with awareness. Every step closer brought a sense of inevitability. We were no longer intruders. We were threads in a vast, unbroken narrative. As my hands touched the altar, the forest's consciousness surged into my mind. Memories not my own, layered over centuries, flooded thought, intruders from long ago. Rituals executed in perfect cycles, shadows leaving to claim victims. Whispers layered upon screams, despair, and terror, all preserved and catalogued. Every hesitation, every scream, every fleeting thought became part of the eternal archive. The guardian emerged, impossibly tall, composed of shadow and light, lighting the clearing. Understanding was instantaneous. The cycle was eternal, and we were now participants, woven into the fabric of the forest's consciousness. The pool boiled, grotesque figures, emerging with elongated limbs, twisting unnaturally, yet moving with terrifying coordination. The altar pulsed, stones vibrating with intelligence, synchronized with every shadow, every movement, every ripple of the water. Mist coiled around our limbs, pressing, guiding, testing. Shadows circled with precise intent, observing, evaluating. Each step toward the altar was negotiation with a consciousness beyond comprehension. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought measured and catalogued. The whispers layered over themselves, spanning centuries of intrusion, echoing the voices of past participants. Witness, complete, belong, submit, integrate, become part, eternal. Time fractured, reality twisted. Centuries of ceremonies, intruders folded into consciousness, shadows claiming victims, whispers layered upon screams. Everything surged into awareness. The clearing, stones, pool, and shadows merged into one sentient entity. Patient, eternal, unyielding. The pull toward the altar intensified. Resistance was impossible. Each heartbeat, each breath, each movement resonated with the forest's rhythm. Shadows pressed closer, mist wrapped tighter. Whispers screamed in unison. Witness, complete, become, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal figures emerged from the pool, grotesque, twisting unnaturally, limbs elongated beyond human form. Eyes glowed red, reflecting the altar's crimson light. Movements synchronized with the guardian and the pulse of the stones. Whispers layered centuries of fear, observation, and ritual, echoing endlessly in our consciousness. Hands on the altar, reality shattered completely. Time warped, fractured, stretched into incomprehensible lengths. Centuries of ceremonies, intruders integrated. Shadows claiming victims, whispers layered upon screams, surging into a single consciousness. The guardian loomed, eternal, patient, intelligent. The cycle was unbroken, unavoidable, inexorable. The forest itself breathed, live in every tree, every stone, every shadow. The pool boiled, mist thickened, pressing against mind and body. Whispers layered commands over centuries of intruders. Witness, become part, complete, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal, panic surged, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. Fully integrated, we became participants, threads in the eternal narrative. Reality bent, perception fractured, shadows pressed closer, mist coiled, whispers screamed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought became part of the archive. Preserved within the forest's consciousness, dawn approached, but the clearing remained timeless. Shadows receded only slightly. Mist lingered. Whispers persisted faintly, insistent. The forest had claimed us mentally, spiritually, eternally. The clearing, altar, pool, shadows all endure. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper is part of the cycle. Cataloged and preserved, even after leaving, the pool remains. Shadows flicker at edges of vision. Whispers thread through silence. The forest waits, patient, eternal, unyielding. One day, it will call again. Cycle continues, unbroken, integrating all trespassers, preserving fear, observation, obedience for centuries yet to come. Some places, rituals, horrors, older than time, patient, eternal, unrelenting, bound, integrated, forever part of forest consciousness. Every whisper, shadow, heartbeat echoes into eternity, a testament to the unbroken cycle of witness, terror, submission. The forest is alive, always watching, always patient, always eternal. And one day, it will call again. We are part of it. Forever, every observer, every trespasser, every participant recorded. Whispers echo. Shadows linger. Mist coils. Stones pulse. Pool churns. Guardian watches. Eternal, patient, unyielding. Pool never ends. Reality warps at edges. Time folds. Perception bends. Forest waits. The cycle is eternal. Witnesses integrate. Shadows consume. Whispers record. Stones pulse. Pool reflects eternity. Guardian observes. Mist envelops. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought, cataloged. The night stretches into infinity. Darkness presses. Shadows coil. Whispers call. Every intruder, every observer becomes part of the eternal archive. The forest endures, always watching, always patient, always eternal. Even now, decades later, pool persists, shadows flicker, whispers thread through quiet moments. Forest waits, patient, eternal, boundless, unstoppable. One day, it will call again. Cycle continues, unbroken, eternal, integrating all who dare witness, submit, and belong. Some horrors are timeless. Some places live beyond perception. Some rituals never end. Forest endures, always watching, always patient, always eternal. And we are part of it forever. The forest stretched before us like a living entity, ancient and patient, its presence pressing on every sense. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but beneath it was something metallic, something older than time. Shadows twisted unnaturally among the trees, elongating in ways that defied logic, coiling and uncoiling as if observing, evaluating our presence. The whispers began almost immediately, threading into our minds with layered, insistent voices. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, integrate, become, part, eternal. The clearing ahead seemed to pulse with energy. The jagged stones, taller and sharper than memory allowed, were etched with crimson symbols that glimmered in the dim moonlight. At the center, the pool of black water roiled, reflecting shapes that no human mind could fully comprehend. Shadows moved around the edges, elongated, distorted, their eyes burning like coals. Intelligent and patient, every step toward the clearing was like moving through a current of some unseen force. The forest itself seemed to breathe, every tree, every stone, every leaf moving in sync with a rhythm that was both incomprehensible and undeniable. I felt the pull to the altar, magnetic and irresistible. As I approached, the whispers layered upon themselves, a chorus of centuries. Witness, become, complete, integrate, submit, belong, eternal. When my hands touched the altar, the world shifted. Memories flooded my consciousness, memories that were not mine, belonging to intruders who had come before. Lost to the forest, enfolded into its consciousness. Rituals, ceremonies, screams, whispers, each preserved, each layered atop the next, forming an infinite archive of observation and terror. The stones pulsed beneath my palms, vibrating in perfect rhythm with the guardian that emerged from the shadows. The guardian was impossibly tall, a being of shadow and light, dominating the clearing with an intelligence that transcended human understanding. It communicated without words. The cycle was eternal. We were now threads woven into the forest's consciousness. The pool boiled violently, and from its depths, grotesque forms emerged. Humanoid, yet impossible, twisting unnaturally, limbs elongated, synchronized with the stones, the altar, and the guardian. Mist coiled around our bodies, constricting, yet guiding. Shadows circled, precise, deliberate, their movements a choreography of intent. Each step we took was measured and catalogued. Whispers layered over centuries of intruders. The voices of the long-forgotten, echoing in unison. Witness, belong, submit, integrate, become part, eternal. Time began to fracture. Reality bent and stretched. Centuries of rituals and ceremonies surged into our minds. The clearing, the stones, the pool, and the shadows merged into one sentient, patient, eternal entity. We were no longer observers. We were participants, threads in the endless narrative. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought became part of the forest's consciousness. Pulled toward the altar intensified. Resistance was impossible. Shadows pressed closer. The mist tightened. Whispers screamed in layered unison. Witness, complete, become, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal figures emerged from the pool. Grotesque, twisting, limbs elongated beyond human form, eyes glowing red, reflecting the altar's crimson light. Their movements synchronized perfectly with the stone's pulse and the guardian's presence. I pressed both hands on the altar. Reality shattered. Time fractured. Centuries of ceremonies. Intruders integrated. Shadows claiming victims. Whispers layering over screams all surged into awareness. The guardian loomed, eternal, patient, intelligent. The cycle was unbroken, unavoidable, inexorable. The forest breathed. Every tree, stone, shadow, alive. Pool boiled. Mist thickened, pressing against mind and body. Whispers layered commands with centuries of intruders' voices. Witness, become part, complete, integrate, submit, belong. Eternal panic surged, yet instinct and terror propelled us forward. Fully integrated, we were threads in the eternal narrative. Reality bent, perception fractured. Shadows pressed closer, mist coiled, whispers screamed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought recorded, preserved in the forest's consciousness. Part conclusion. The forest's presence intensified with every heartbeat. Shadows pressed against us, mist curling like living chains. Whispers layering over centuries of terror. Witness, complete, belong, remain, submit, integrate, become part, eternal. It was no longer just observation. The forest itself demanded participation, understanding, and acceptance. We were drawn to the pool, its black waters reflecting grotesque, impossible forms. Each ripple contained fragments of century screams, ceremonies, rituals, shadows claiming victims. Whispers integrating them into the forest's consciousness. I realized we were standing at the apex of an eternal cycle. To resist was futile. To flee was impossible. To witness was now synonymous with becoming. The guardian emerged fully, a towering silhouette of shadow and shifting light. Its presence pressed against mind and body, communicating the entirety of the forest's consciousness. We understood, not with thought, but with being. Every intruder, every observer, every trespasser for centuries had been woven into the forest's narrative. We were next, our essence already merging. Hands on the altar, energy surged. The stones pulsed violently, responding to our integration. Shadows enveloped us, stretching and twisting unnaturally. Figures emerged from the pool, grotesque and humanoid, limbs elongated in movements synchronized. Whispers screamed layered commands. Submit, integrate, witness, become part, complete, eternal. Time collapsed. Reality fractured. Centuries of rituals, ceremonies, and intruders surged into consciousness. We became both observers and participants simultaneously. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought threaded into the forest's archive. Our fear, confusion, and understanding existed in perfect harmony within its awareness. The clearing, court, the stones, the pool, and shadows merged fully. They were no longer separate entities, but a singular, sentient consciousness. Our bodies and minds were cataloged, integrated, eternal. The forest's patience was infinite. Its reach was inexorable. Our identities dissolved, placed by awareness within something far older than human understanding. Mist coiled tighter. Shadows pressed closer. Whispers layered in an unending chant. The guardian observed, ensuring full comprehension of the cycle. Figures from the pool enveloped us. The energy of the altar surged, binding our consciousness. Every scream, every hesitation, every thought became part of the eternal narrative. The forest breathed as a single entity. The pool roiled, mist thickened, shadows stretched and writhed. Every heartbeat and breath became indistinguishable from the forest itself. Time had no meaning here. We existed within a perpetual present, integrated, immortalized. Dawn approached, yet the clearing remained timeless. Shadows and mist slowly receded, yet the forest's presence lingered, eternal, patient, unyielding. The whispers continued faintly, insistent. The cycle was complete. We were no longer separate. We were part of the forest, part of its memory, part of its eternal narrative. Even now, long after leaving physically, the pool remains. Shadows flicker at the edges of perception. Whispers thread through silence. The forest waits, patient, eternal, unyielding. One day it will call again. The cycle continues, integrating all who witness, submit, and belong. Some horrors are older than time. Some places live beyond human perception. Some rituals never end. The forest endures, always watching, always patient, always eternal. And we, now fully part of it, are bound forever. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper echoes into eternity. The clearing, the stones, the pool, the shadows, and the guardian all endure. Every observer, every intruder, every participant preserved. Reality folds, time fractures, perception bends. The forest waits, always patient, always eternal, always watching. And so the story ends, not with escape or release, but with integration, submission, and eternal witness. The forest has claimed all. We are part of it now, threads in the unbroken cycle, forever immortalized in shadow, whisper, stone, and water. The horror is complete, the narrative eternal, and the cycle continues, patient, infinite, unstoppable.